Things are getting really interesting in Seattle right now because we've got multiple situations developing at the same time, and some of them could have a much bigger impact than they initially seem. There's a major contract situation still hanging in the air, a possible roster move that's starting to feel more serious, and even some news outside Seattle that could eventually work in the Seahawks' favor. There's a lot to unpack here, so stick with me, because you're definitely going to want to hear how all of this connects. But first, hit that like button to support the channel. And if you're ready for more Seahawks football, drop a "Go Hawks" in the comments. The Devon Witherspoon contract situation has reached one of the most interesting points of Seahawks training camp, because the extension that appeared to have real momentum early in camp still has not been completed. With Seattle already well into camp, Witherspoon finally gave a clearer picture of where his mind is while negotiations continue behind the scenes, and his comments suggest that he is refusing to allow the business side of football to become a distraction from what he is doing on the field. When Witherspoon spoke to the media, his message was simple. "Really, I'm not worried about that right now. I'm out here to focus on making plays and trying to get better day by day. We've got other stuff we're focused on, and ultimately, we're just trying to win games. So, that's what I'm focused on right now." That answer matters because there had been an expectation that an extension could happen around the early part of training camp. Instead, the situation has continued without a deal being announced. But based on everything presented about these negotiations, this does not sound like a relationship falling apart. It sounds like two sides that want to reach an agreement while also protecting their own interests. Seattle has a responsibility to negotiate the best possible contract for the team. That is part of John Schneider's job. On the other side, Witherspoon and his agent have every reason to pursue as much value as possible for the player. Witherspoon has done what Seattle has asked of him, and the argument being made is that very few players can play his position in the way he does, especially at his level. That is why the possibility of Witherspoon eventually becoming one of the highest-paid players at his position remains such an important part of this conversation. There is another detail that could be playing a role in how everything is developing. Christian Gonzalez is represented by the same agent, and both players are looking for top-level contracts. At the same time, the teams involved in those negotiations appear willing to offer money around the top of the market without necessarily wanting to completely reset that market. That creates an interesting negotiating environment. Earlier in camp, it felt like there was legitimate momentum toward Witherspoon potentially becoming the highest-paid cornerback in the NFL. That momentum now appears to have cooled somewhat, at least publicly. But there is still a belief expressed in the source that the deal ultimately gets completed. And one of the biggest reasons for optimism is how little unnecessary noise has surrounded these talks. Witherspoon has not spent camp publicly applying pressure to Seattle. The Seahawks have not turned the negotiation into a public battle either. There have been occasional comments, but for the most part both sides have kept the situation under control. Witherspoon's latest comments continued that approach. Instead of making his contract the story of his training camp, he emphasized making plays, improving every day, and winning games. And while everyone waits to see whether Seattle and Witherspoon finally reach that agreement, another cornerback situation has suddenly become extremely interesting for the Seahawks. Terrion Arnold worked out for Seattle, and what was shown from that workout has created a legitimate question about whether the Seahawks could eventually bring him in. Arnold went through several drills during the workout. There was no hitting involved. He was in shorts and a t-shirt while going through the different things Seattle wanted to see from him. The reaction from Mike Macdonald and the staff appeared positive, and there was a lengthy discussion surrounding Arnold. That discussion is important because Seattle would have to make sure everyone involved is comfortable before deciding to add a player in this situation. What makes this more intriguing is the suggestion that there was a real possibility Arnold could be playing during the preseason. That does not mean Seattle has signed him, and it does not guarantee that Seattle will sign him. But it adds to the evidence presented that the Seahawks' interest is more than casual. Seattle also is not alone. Darnold has already met with the New Orleans Saints, and he also traveled to meet with the New York Giants. The Houston Texans have shown interest as well. So there are multiple teams looking into Darnold, and that creates a very different situation than Seattle simply being able to wait indefinitely and decide later. The more information that has emerged, the stronger the belief has become that Seattle sees a way Darnold could potentially improve this team. One question the coaches would need to answer involves what happened with his play last year. Hawk Blogger and others have suggested that his regression may have had more to do with injury than simply poor performance. Determining exactly what Seattle believes about that would obviously be important before any decision. But there is another reason the Seahawks' interest makes sense, based strictly on what was presented. Depth. Nehemiah Pritchett has been receiving a lot of positive attention, and Noah Igbinoghene has received some as well. Devin Witherspoon is obviously part of that cornerback room, but beyond the established options, Seattle has a number of young players. That becomes important because injuries can change the situation extremely quickly. Seattle has already seen an example of that during camp. An injury caused Julian Love to miss time, which meant other players had to be on the field. During training camp, that is manageable. During the regular season, the consequences can be much more significant. The concern becomes even clearer when looking at what happened to Seattle's major cornerback starters last year. The source points out that Witherspoon missed time, and other important starters at the position missed time as well. That experience creates a straightforward argument for having another dependable option available, instead of being forced to immediately rely on inexperienced players if injuries begin piling up. That is where Darnold becomes especially interesting. The possibility presented here is not necessarily about bringing someone in and immediately changing everything in the secondary. It is about whether Seattle believes Darnold can provide an upgrade and give the Seahawks another option at a position where depth can disappear quickly. If Seattle can sign him on a lower-cost deal and receive a much bigger return from his performance, the move could become extremely valuable. Nothing in the information available says that a signing has happened. Nothing guarantees that it will happen. Darnold is receiving attention from other teams, and Seattle still has decisions to make. But after the workout, the discussions around him and the continued information emerging about the Seahawks' evaluation, the interest appears very real. And that leaves Seahawks fans with a fascinating decision to debate, while the Witherspoon negotiations continue at the same time. Based on everything Seattle saw in the workout, and the need for reliable depth at cornerback, what do you have to say about the Seahawks potentially signing Terrion Darnold? And while the cornerback situation gives Seattle something important to monitor, there is another development that could matter to the Seahawks for a completely different reason. Adam Schefter discussed potential discipline involving different players, and one of the names mentioned was Rams wide receiver Puka Nacua. According to the information presented, there is still a possibility that Nacua could face a suspension following issues from the offseason, with the discussion pointing to the biting incident among the matters involved. For Seattle, the important question is not simply whether Nacua gets suspended. It is what a possible suspension could mean for the Rams before Seattle eventually faces them. The Seahawks do not play the Rams until much later in the season, so the expectation presented here is that a suspension would not directly remove Nacua from that matchup. There is no suggestion that the NFL would suspend him for anything close to 16 games based on this case. Instead, the interesting part is what could happen to Los Angeles during whatever period Nacua might potentially miss. If a suspension happens and lasts for a meaningful number of games, could the Rams lose games that they otherwise might have won? That is where this becomes relevant for Seattle. The Rams do not have an easy schedule, and neither do the Seahawks. If Los Angeles were forced to play without Nakua and things went wrong during that stretch, those losses could create an opportunity for Seattle to gain ground before the teams meet later in the year. The source specifically points back to the Rams losing a game to the Falcons last year that they were believed to have been capable of winning, showing how one result can become significant. That potential impact becomes even more important when considering how tight the battle can become for the NFC West and the #1 seed in the NFC. If Seattle can put itself in position to gain an advantage because Los Angeles drops games while dealing with unavailable players, that is obviously a situation Seahawks fans will want to monitor. For now, however, this remains something to watch, rather than something that has been decided. The exact outcome of any NFL discipline involving Nakua remains unclear based on the information provided. The key will be seeing what the league ultimately decides and, if a suspension does happen, exactly how long it lasts. Meanwhile, Seattle itself continues evaluating its roster. The Seahawks held another tryout, and one notable element was the number of tight ends brought in. That raises a couple of possibilities mentioned in the source. Seattle could simply be looking for additional depth at tight end, or the team could potentially be evaluating whether one of those players has the ability to convert to fullback. Wide receiver was another position represented during the tryout, although the interpretation presented there was that those evaluations could have more to do with special teams. So there are several different situations developing simultaneously around Seattle. Witherspoon's contract negotiations continue without the public drama that can sometimes surround a major extension. Darnold remains a legitimate name to monitor after working out for the Seahawks, while also drawing attention from other teams. Seattle continues looking at additional players through tryouts, and outside the building, the possibility of discipline for Nakua creates another storyline worth following. The important distinction is that several of these situations remain unresolved. Witherspoon has not signed the extension discussed here yet. Darnold has not been confirmed as a Seahawks signing, and the potential Nakua suspension has not been presented as a final NFL decision. These are developing situations, and the next piece of information could change the conversation quickly. Now, I want to hear from Seahawks fans. Which of these developments are you watching most closely? And do you think Seattle should move forward with Tyrion Darnold? Subscribe to the channel and turn on your notifications so you don't miss the next Seahawks update. If you enjoyed the video, hit the like button and tell us what you think in the comments. And before you leave, click the video that's on your screen right now and keep watching. For Seahawks news and the latest developments as they happen, the first updates are right here. Go Seahawks!